Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're watching this. We are now moving into the next section here, which is that of the literature review. So without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? What we are learning so far in this course is that research can be inductively or deductively constructed, right? But most often, research process is not linear. What we begin to narrow down, or when we begin to narrow down a topic, we may learn more background information that has us refining our own ideas, right? What we wanted to find, we didn't, now we have to try to refine it. It's important to learn about others' work in order to prepare for our own research studies. The goal of conducting literature research is to search for and synthesize previous research that informs our research question. That is a document often added to your first step draft that includes relevant previous works to provide context for your own research, summarizing what is already known about your topic and analyzing trends, patterns, and gaps in the previous literature so that you can position your research within the larger context. The literature review helps us define the significance of what you aim to study, what has been previously studied around your topic. From theories used, samples, the methodology, and the findings. You've been learning from and building it from a case for your study by explaining the context where it fits into the considered previous research. You've been in that process. So, as it says, previous research informs you on these things, right? Research informs you on questions and concepts, summarizes what's already known, examines trends, etc. Right? So while searching for previous studies done for your topics, you may find that there is a lot of engagement and you may find that there's some disagreements among researchers. So will you challenge the previous findings? Will you, by chance, use a different theoretical contribution? Are you attempting to update a study, look at the information from a different lens, or connect previous missing concepts? Now, this is things you need to know, right? Like, how are we going to be able to fill these gaps in? So if you're going to be doing this, right, and you're going to be trying to use this and getting going, right, how do we go about doing this? Well, searching for these articles or peer-reviewed journals that are relevant to our fields is a great start, right? There may be also be academic books that have been published with larger studies on the topic that you're interested in. Use a lot of calculation when simply doing an online search, such as through Google, to find previous literature. If you're not familiar with Google Scholar, it's a really good tool that you can utilize in regards to this, right? So there may be websites that are useful, such as those sources that collect their own primary data. Pew Center, Gallup, Norrick at University of Chicago, the US Census, and the like. Usually, educational and governmental organizations will be more trustworthy when doing simple online searching. You also have the ASU Library, by the way. There are many websites out there that gather information from various sources, but they don't specify why they're great data, why they just kind of have it. This is bad news bears, or said different way. This is a big red flag for us researchers, since we cannot rely on their data if we don't know where it comes from. So always be sure to vet any sources that you find on the internet. Do not rely on crowdsourced information or websites that pull information and don't actually collect it on their own, right? This is a big deal. Now, I want to bring up something, sorry for clearing my throat there, that is important to know. So, TLDR, I have a colleague, Dr. C. He works in North Carolina, and he recently did an amazing TikTok. If you don't follow Dr. C on TikTok, you should. Essentially, there was an academic journal that was saying that race, which is a social construction, that race was used by Augustus or Julius Caesar in one of his famous speeches. It baffled his mind because it looked like an academic journal. But now here's the but. He wasn't really specified in figuring this out, so he passed it to his colleague who works in antiquities and history. And after much research, they found that the citations, as we're learning about, were not properly vetted, but it was in an academic journal. And essentially, it was an Egyptian politician who had redone this, the lecture, right, the speech by the former Roman, and had not properly recorded it. So actually, it ended up that the data was from 1983. Now, race wasn't really constructed until the 14th, 15th, or 16th century. So by their saying that race was used then, comes to a different argument around critical race theorists. But the proof was that it wasn't done until the 80s, right? So it was well within the time when we started using race as a classification system. Point in fact, do your research, make sure you find and vet your sources, and do not rely on these crowd-sourced information, right? Because that's the issue, is that bias reporting is another item to stay away from, and only use news reports for non-academic support. For instance, if there was a major news item that got you thinking about a topic that needs to be researched, it's fine to use it to build context for the reader, but do not rely on the news source for the data, and do not just guess that this is correct, or you may be quoting that race was done in Julius Caesar time, right? Julius Caesar time, when it wasn't. It was by a politician in 1983 in Egypt that this was done, but the proper sourcing, and it even had confused us academics because it was in a journal. So this is huge. It's not just mistakes made by students like yourself. You have to do your research. So it's fine to use a little bit of context for the reader, but do not rely on that data. Organize your thoughts, or organize your search, I should say, on previous literature around the key concepts which you study. ASU's library database is going to be the best place for you to find articles. If you have not yet started to take advantage of the in-person or online librarians, do so. They're amazing. They got me through grad school. They are just 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. They get all the roses. Since you have full access to any articles that are online, that is great. If you're near the ASU campus, you can go into the library and check out physical copies of books. I know they're great. They smell interesting. They have that feeling, that tactile feeling. Oh, love it. Make copies of these articles and the use of the resources available there. You may be able to gain access to another university's library if in your area as well. Yet from my experience, I have found most articles are now available on, and ASU does not, are available online. And the ASU does a great job of gaining access for us. Once you identify a useful book or article, note which publication is author's reference, right? You can also search to the ASU's library database for newer articles that have cited the article you may have found. You may discover citations that appear often, suggesting they are core references within the subject matter. So it's very important for you to utilize the resources when you're reading articles. You need to make sure you read the abstract first, right? You have to do these things. You may discover that citations appear often, and you want to make sure that you take advantage of this, right? So when we're looking for the subject matter, take note of this and definitely consider it as an important source. Once you've identified the potential resources, read them and find out anything of the value of your project. But how do you read through all of them? It's not like reading a novel, right? None of us academics sit here and read the 3,000-page papers every single time. Here's a suggested way to navigate previous research. Begin with the abstract. The abstract usually begins with the article and states the purpose of the research, the methods used, and the major findings. The abstract will not give you everything you need, but it should give you enough overview to tell if the article is or isn't relevant to your research. If it is relevant, put it aside and move on. If it does seem to be relevant, right, skim through the article, paying attention to the subheadings. Then begin to read the sections in more detail, paying particular attention to the major concepts, right, theories, methods, and findings. As you review several articles, you will begin to see a framework emerge of how it's proper to do this in order to not sit there for hours, hours, and hours, and be able to start learning how to do it. Now, in front of you is an example of kind of a chart of how you can start using it, right? Themes and patterns. Are there patterns or trends in the methods used? How about the findings? As you take notes, I highly recommend putting these into a table, as you can see on your screen right here. Feel free to source this. You can find something like this easy so that you can clearly connect the trends, see differences, and have one place to refer to as your references as you actually begin to write your literature review document. Now, this is a simple matrix that is often used to organize information for literature reviews. Use what works for you. Don't just do what I say. Use what works for you. Make sure to do so with academic integrity. And the more practice researchers get at conducting and organizing previous literature, the easier it gets to find a good organizational structure that works for them. So remember, it's practice, practice, practice. Babby has many questions to consider when evaluating previous research, from analyzing the theoretical orientation used to the research design, the concepts and how they were measured, how the sample was collected, and of course, what findings and the concludings were made. Take note of these in your table and the matrix. So as you can see here, right? So there's steps for success when you're writing your resource, right? Once you find all the major trends in your information from your own research, which you may go back and later and add more if you find something that is essential to consider, right? Now it's time to start writing your lit review. This is where you communicate what you found in the previous research to build the context for your research or potentially for future resources that is needed. From your matrix, now you will make an outline of your literary or lit review, identifying the major subtopics and structures based on theoretical, methodological, and finding trends, similarities, differences, and generalizations, of course. Then begin to build out your draft from there. Make sure to paraphrase and give proper credit by citing the sources appropriately so as not to plagiarize others' works. This is huge, right? Literature reviews synthesize information and trends from the various previous works, right? And do not simply direct quote or summarize one article at a time. We do not want summaries of each article. We want to build a lit review around the themes that are providing context for our own research. So really work on paraphrasing and integrating information from various sources under specific subheadings for your themes. Anytime you use information from another author, you must cite it in the sentence where you use it. Let me say it again. You must cite it in the sentence where you use it anytime you use information from another author. So you use information. So literature reviews should have several citations in parenthesis thought, right? Throughout, parentheses throughout. And of course, while we do not rely on information from biased sources, social researchers must also practice ethical writing and reporting by practicing professional honesty. Practicing professional honesty. Make sure to use APA style guidelines correctly, right? Cite anytime you use the author's information in a sentence, author, year, right? Write clearly to communicate the research, not to impress or persuade. Be ethical in your searchings and your reportings. And remember to study, prepare, and read. These classes move so fast, right? So, and of course, while we do not want to rely on information from the biased sources, as I said, researchers must also practice, as I just mentioned, the ethical writing and reporting by practicing professional honesty, representing the overall findings without being biased ourselves. We're trying to obtain Verstehen, it's hard to do, with the viewpoints we aim to include in our review. And as always, I will see you in the next lecture. Remember, study, prepare, learn, keep ahead of your work, or else you're going to fall behind, which then makes you have to make choices that could lead to disintegral choices, right? Because if you fall behind, you're trying to catch back up. That's not what you want to do. Stay on track. I'll see you in the next lecture.